The story of Constance Marten and Mark Gordon is one that seems almost too strange to be true. A tale of two people from completely different worlds whose lives collided in a way that would ultimately lead to unimaginable tragedy. On one side, you have Constance Marten. She was born into a life of immense privilege and wealth, a member of the British aristocracy with ties that reached the very highest levels of society. Her father was a page to Queen Elizabeth II, and her upbringing was one of country estates and exclusive social circles. She was educated and by all accounts had a future that most could only dream of, yet she chose to turn her back on it all, driven by a deep-seated distrust of the establishment she was born into. On the other side stands Mark Gordon, a man whose life story could not be more different. His early years were spent in Florida, but they were far from idyllic. As a teenager, his life took a dark turn when he was convicted of serious crimes, rape and kidnapping, which resulted in him spending over 2 decades in an American prison. Upon his release, he was deported to the United Kingdom, a country he barely knew, and was placed on the sex offender register. He was a man marked by his past, a past that would follow him and shape the perceptions of everyone he met, including the authorities who would later become so deeply involved in his life and that of his partner, Constance. The meeting of these two individuals created a partnership that was, from the outside, bewildering to many. What could an aristocrat, estranged from her family but still benefiting from its financial support, see in a man with such a violent and troubled history? For Marten, it seems Gordon represented a rejection of the polished and, in her view, hypocritical world she came from. Their relationship was intense, and they became inseparable, forming a tight-knit unit against what they perceived as a hostile world. This bond, however, would become a central issue for social services, who worried that the couple prioritized their own relationship above all else, including the safety and well-being of their children. It is this dynamic, the fusion of Marten's anti-establishment paranoia and Gordon's history of criminality, that sets the stage for the devastating events that followed. They saw themselves as victims, fighting for the right to raise their family free from the interference of a system they believed was corrupt and biased against them. They were united in their belief that they were the only ones who could properly care for their children. This conviction, however misguided, would lead them down a path of secrecy and flight, a desperate attempt to keep their family together that would have the most heartbreaking of consequences, proving that love, when combined with profound delusion, can be a destructive force. Before the birth of baby Victoria, Constance Marten and Mark Gordon already had a long and troubled history with social services. The couple had 4 other children, none of whom were in their care. Each child had been removed by the authorities due to significant concerns about their welfare. This was not a sudden intervention, but the result of a pattern of behavior that professionals found deeply worrying. The primary reasons cited by social services were complex and layered, painting a picture of a chaotic and unstable home environment. The authorities were particularly concerned about the couple's tendency to prioritize their own intense relationship over the fundamental needs of their children, creating a situation where the young ones were not the central focus. Adding to these concerns was Mark Gordon's criminal past. His conviction for rape and kidnapping in the United States, and his subsequent status on the sex offender register in the United Kingdom, raised major red flags for child protection agencies. The risk he might pose was a constant shadow over the family. Furthermore, there were documented instances of domestic violence within the household which only served to heighten the alarm. The combination of these factors led social services to conclude that the children were at risk of harm if they remained with their parents. This history of intervention meant that when Marten became pregnant for a 5th time, the couple knew that the authorities would be watching them closely. The couple's perspective on this was, of course, entirely different. They did not see themselves as neglectful or dangerous parents. Instead, they viewed the actions of social services as a form of persecution. They believed the system was unfairly targeting them, using Gordon's past as a pretext to tear their family apart. their distrust was not entirely without foundation in their minds. During the later trial, it was revealed that one of their children had suffered physical abuse while in the foster care system. This horrific event would have only solidified their belief that the state was incapable of protecting their children, and that they were the only ones who could truly keep them safe. This deep-seated conviction that they were being unjustly pursued fueled their decision to hide Marten's fifth pregnancy. They were determined that this child, their baby Victoria, would not be taken from them. In their eyes, going off-grid was not a reckless choice, but a necessary act of defiance to protect their family. They were convinced that running was their only option to prevent what they saw as the inevitable and wrongful removal of their newborn. This mindset, a potent mix of fear, love, and profound paranoia, set them on a collision course with the law and would ultimately seal their baby's tragic fate long before she was even born. The plan to vanish with their new baby was set in motion in late 2022. Constance Marten and Mark Gordon made a deliberate choice to go off-grid, a term that describes severing all ties with the trackable digital world. This meant abandoning bank accounts, credit cards, and mobile phones that could be traced. Their goal was simple: to have their baby in secret and raise her far from the prying eyes of social services. They believed that if they could just disappear, they could live as a family, undisturbed and together. The pregnancy was carefully concealed, and as the due date approached, they prepared for a life on the run, gathering cash and supplies for a nomadic existence outside mainstream society. The birth of their daughter, whom they named Victoria, likely took place in late December 2022 or early January 2023. There were no doctors, no midwives, and no medical records, just the two of them alone. This was a critical part of their plan to avoid detection. However, the reality of caring for a newborn without any support or proper shelter immediately presented immense challenges. They were now fugitives, not just as a couple, but as a family with a vulnerable infant whose existence was a secret they had to protect at all costs. Their desperate attempt to escape the system had plunged them and their baby into a precarious and dangerous new reality. The public first became aware of their disappearance on January 5, 2023. On that day, a car was found abandoned and burning on the hard shoulder of the M61 motorway near Bolton. When emergency services arrived, the vehicle was engulfed in flames, but the occupants were gone. Inside the wreckage, police made a startling discovery that transformed a routine incident into a high-stakes national search. They found a placenta wrapped carefully in a towel. This was the undeniable proof that a baby had recently been born, and that its mother was likely Constance Marten, who was already known to the authorities. The manhunt began immediately. From that moment on, the couple's desperate flight became a race against time. They knew the discovery of the car and the placenta meant the authorities were on their trail. Their initial plan for a quiet disappearance had failed spectacularly, and they were now the subjects of a major police investigation. The nationwide search was not just about finding two missing people. It was about finding a baby who was believed to be in grave danger. The police and the public feared for the infant's life, knowing she was with parents who were ill-equipped to care for her while on the run, especially in the bitter cold of a British winter. With the discovery of the burning car, one of the most intensive and widely publicized manhunts in recent British memory was launched. The police were in a desperate race against time, driven by the urgent need to find a newborn baby who had been exposed to the elements since birth. For 53 days, Constance Marten and Mark Gordon managed to evade a nationwide network of police forces using their knowledge of how to stay off the grid. They relied exclusively on cash to avoid leaving a digital footprint, paying for taxis, accommodation, and supplies without using traceable bank cards. This simple but effective tactic made tracking their movements incredibly difficult for investigators. Their journey was a frantic zigzag across the country, a testament to their determination to remain free. From the motorway near Bolton, they travelled north to Northumberland, then doubled back to Liverpool. From there, they made their way across to the port of Harwich in Essex, before heading into the sprawling anonymity of London. In the capital, they moved between different areas, using taxis to cover large distances, and often concealing their faces with hoods and masks to avoid being identified on the vast network of CCTV cameras. They also used burner phones, cheap disposable mobiles, to communicate, but even these were used sparingly to minimize the risk of being traced. Throughout the 53-day search, the police made repeated public appeals, not just to locate the couple, but to plead with them directly. Senior officers spoke to the media, urging Marten and Gordon to think of their baby's health and safety. They stressed that their primary concern was the welfare of the infant and promised that the couple would be given the help they needed if they came forward. The public was also enlisted in the search, with their images circulated widely on news channels and social media. Sightings were reported from all over the country, but the couple always seemed to be one step ahead, melting away before the police could close in. Their final destination was Brighton, a city on the south coast known for its vibrant alternative culture and large transient population. It was here, they perhaps believed, that they could finally blend in and disappear for good. They bought camping equipment, including a flimsy tent and sleeping bags, preparing to live outdoors as the winter weather worsened. Their movements became more localized, but their luck was about to run out. The constant media attention and public awareness had made them too recognizable, and it was only a matter of time before their desperate flight came to an end in the seaside town they had chosen as their last refuge. The 53-day manhunt finally concluded on February 27, 2023. A member of the public spotted Constance Marten and Mark Gordon in Brighton and immediately alerted the police. When officers arrived, they found the couple looking disheveled and weary, their clothes dirty from weeks of living rough. They were arrested on suspicion of child neglect, but there was one crucial and horrifying problem: the baby was not with them. The immediate relief of finding the fugitives was instantly replaced by a wave of dread. The urgent question that hung in the air was simple and terrifying. Where was baby Victoria? Initially, Marten and Gordon were uncooperative, refusing to tell the police where their daughter was. They deflected questions and offered conflicting and confusing accounts, leaving investigators to fear the worst. This refusal to cooperate triggered a massive and frantic search operation across a 90-square-mile area of the Sussex countryside, including the sprawling South Downs National Park. Hundreds of police officers, search and rescue volunteers, and specialists using drones and helicopters scoured the area, desperately hoping to find the infant alive. For 2 agonizing days, the search continued, with the public watching on, praying for a miracle that was not to come. The search came to its heartbreaking conclusion on March 1st, 2023. Acting on intelligence gathered during the investigation, police focused on a patch of overgrown allotments in Brighton. It was there, inside a disused shed, that they made the discovery everyone had been fearing. Baby Victoria's tiny, decomposed body was found wrapped in a plastic bag and hidden away. The infant had been dead for some time. The nationwide search, which had begun with the hope of rescuing a vulnerable child, had ended in the most tragic way imaginable. The couple's desperate flight had not saved their daughter. It had led directly to her death. A post-mortem examination was conducted, but due to the condition of the baby's body, a definitive cause of death could not be determined. However, the evidence collected by forensic experts painted a grim picture. It was concluded that Victoria had most likely died from exposure to the cold, a condition known as hypothermia, or cold stress. She had been kept in a flimsy tent during the cold, damp and windy conditions of a British January, with inadequate clothing to protect her from the freezing temperatures. The dream of a life together as a family had dissolved into a nightmare of neglect and death in a cold, dark tent. The first trial of Constance Marten and Mark Gordon began in early 2024 at the Old Bailey in London and quickly became a media spectacle. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision, arguing that the couple's actions were not those of loving parents, but of individuals who had willfully and recklessly neglected their child's most basic needs. They presented evidence showing that Marten and Gordon had numerous opportunities to seek help for their baby, but had chosen not to. The Crown's lawyers argued that the decision to live in a tent in the middle of winter with a newborn was a selfish one, prioritizing their desire to evade social services over Victoria's very survival. The defense, however, told a very different story. Constance Marten took the stand and portrayed their actions as being born of love and overwhelming fear. She insisted that they went on the run because they were terrified that social services would take Victoria away, just as they had taken their 4 other children. She claimed that the baby's death was a tragic and devastating accident. According to Marten, she had fallen asleep while breastfeeding Victoria in the tent, and when she woke up, the baby was gone. She presented herself as a heartbroken mother, not a cruel monster, whose worst fears had come true in the most horrific way possible. The proceedings were marked by frequent disruptions and unusual courtroom behavior from both defendants. The couple dismissed multiple legal teams. Marten reportedly went through 14 different barristers over the course of the legal process. They often missed sessions, and when they were present, their conduct drew attention. In a particularly dramatic moment, Marten revealed Gordon's past rape conviction to the jury, a piece of information that had previously been withheld. Gordon, who at times chose to represent himself, struggled with legal protocol and made emotional outbursts, further contributing to the chaotic atmosphere of the trial. Their behavior seemed to reinforce the prosecution's portrayal of them as unstable and erratic. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury retired to consider its verdict. The hours turned into days, and after 72 hours of deliberation, it became clear that they were deadlocked. The jurors were unable to reach a unanimous or majority verdict on the most serious charge of gross negligence manslaughter, while they did convict the couple on lesser charges, including concealing a birth and perverting the course of justice. The central question of whether their negligence directly caused Victoria's death remained unanswered. The hung jury meant that the ordeal was far from over. A retrial would be necessary to seek a definitive conclusion. The retrial of Constance Marten and Mark Gordon on the charge of gross negligence manslaughter took place at the Old Bailey in the summer of 2025. The arguments presented by both the prosecution and the defense largely mirrored those of the first trial. The prosecution once again painstakingly detailed the couple's 53 days on the run, emphasizing the freezing temperatures and the wholly inadequate shelter they provided for their newborn daughter. They argued that any reasonable person would have known the immense danger they were putting the baby in, and that their failure to seek medical attention or proper shelter was a criminal breach of their parental duty of care. The defense again centered on Constance Marten's narrative of accidental death. She repeated her claim that she had fallen asleep while holding Victoria and that the death was a tragic co-sleeping incident, not a result of deliberate neglect. Her lawyers argued that her actions were driven by a powerful maternal instinct to protect her child from a social services system she deeply distrusted. They painted a picture of a mother pushed to the brink, making desperate choices out of love, not malice. However, the prosecution countered this by highlighting the couple's lies to the police after their arrest and their efforts to conceal the baby's body, actions they said were inconsistent with a tragic accident. This time, the jury was not divided. In July 2025, after deliberating, they returned a unanimous verdict. Constance Marten, 38, and Mark Gordon, 51, were found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter. They were also convicted on the related charges of child cruelty, concealing the birth of a child, and perverting the course of justice by hiding the baby's body. The verdict marked the legal conclusion to a case that had gripped the nation, confirming that the jury believed the couple's reckless actions were directly responsible for Victoria's death. For the prosecution and the police who had invested so much in the case, it was a moment of solemn vindication. On September 15, 2025, the couple returned to court for sentencing. The judge, Mark Lucraft, delivered a scathing assessment of their behavior, describing their actions as reckless, callous, and entirely avoidable. He stated that they had prioritized their own selfish desire to remain together over the welfare of their child. Both were sentenced to 14 years in prison. In recognition of his violent criminal history, Mark Gordon received an additional 4 years on extended license. The sentence reflected the court's view that this was not simply a tragic accident, but a death caused by a catastrophic and criminal failure of parental responsibility. The case of Constance Marten and Mark Gordon captured the public's imagination like few others because it was a story built on stark and compelling contrasts. At its heart was the collision of two worlds: the extreme privilege of Marten's aristocratic background and the marginalized criminal past of Mark Gordon. Media coverage was intense, often focusing on the bizarre nature of their pairing. How could a woman who grew up with every advantage choose a life on the run with a convicted felon? This question fascinated and horrified the public in equal measure, turning the sad reality of a child's death into a kind of real-life soap opera played out in news headlines and on social media. A key theme that runs through this tragedy is a profound distrust of authority. For Marten, this manifested as a deep-seated paranoia about the system which she believed was corrupt and intent on destroying her family. This view was tragically reinforced in her mind by the fact that one of her other children had been abused while in foster care. This experience, while not excusing her subsequent actions, helps explain the psychological state that led her to believe that running away was her only option. She saw social services not as a safety net, but as a threat, a hostile force from which her baby needed to be rescued, even if that rescue meant living in a tent in freezing conditions. The public reaction to the case was deeply polarized, revealing a sharp divide in how people viewed responsibility and blame. On one side, many saw the couple, particularly Marten, as selfish and delusional individuals who were solely responsible for their daughter's death. They pointed to the couple's lies, their refusal to seek help, and the simple, avoidable fact that a baby was left to die in the cold. For this segment of the public, the 14-year prison sentence was entirely justified, a necessary punishment for such a shocking act of negligence. They viewed the couple's claims of love as a hollow excuse for their inexcusable failure to protect their child. On the other side, a smaller but vocal group expressed a degree of sympathy for the couple. They saw them as victims of a flawed and punitive system that demonizes parents, especially those on the margins of society. This group argued that social services had failed the family long before Victoria's death, and that the couple's fear and paranoia were understandable, if not justifiable. They viewed the lengthy prison sentence as overly harsh, arguing that Marten was a grieving mother who had already suffered the ultimate punishment. This debate highlights the difficulty society has in reconciling empathy for parental struggle with the absolute need to hold individuals accountable for the safety of their children. The tragic story of Constance Marten, Mark Gordon, and baby Victoria leaves us with a number of difficult and enduring questions about family responsibility and the systems designed to protect the vulnerable. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that parental love on its own is not always enough. The couple undoubtedly loved their daughter, but their love was filtered through a lens of extreme paranoia and poor judgment. Their story serves as a stark reminder that a parent's primary responsibility is to provide safety and care. And when their own beliefs put a child in mortal danger, love becomes a tragically insufficient defense for their actions. The case also shines a harsh light on the complex an often fraught relationship between families and social services. While the couple's distrust was extreme, it taps into a wider societal anxiety about state intervention in family life. The revelation that one of their other children was abused in foster care is a chilling indictment of the very system that is supposed to provide a safe alternative. This story challenges us to ask how we can build a child protection system that is not only effective in intervening when necessary, but also capable of earning the trust of the families it is meant to help. It highlights the desperate need for a system that can engage with parents, even deeply difficult ones, in a way that prioritizes the child's welfare above all else. Furthermore, the intense media and public fascination with this case says something about our society as well. The focus on Marten's aristocratic background and Gordon's criminal past often overshadowed the central victim, a baby who never had a chance at life. The story was packaged as a dramatic tale of class rebellion and intrigue, which at times distracted from the simple, grim reality of fatal neglect. It forces us to question how we consume true crime stories and whether our fascination with the perpetrator's psychology can sometimes obscure our empathy for the victims. The tragedy of baby Victoria is not a piece of entertainment. It is a real-world failure with devastating consequences. Ultimately, the case of Constance Marten and Mark Gordon is a modern-day parable with no easy morals. It shows us that tragedy is often born from a complex mix of individual failings, systemic flaws, and psychological turmoil. It reminds us that people can make catastrophic decisions out of what they perceive as love, and that the line between protection and harm can become dangerously blurred. The story of baby Victoria will be remembered as a profound failure on multiple levels: a failure of parenting, a failure of trust, and a failure of society to prevent a death that was, as the judge rightly said, entirely avoidable.